So now we're going to head over to the starts and sits for fantasy for week 6. So, John, if you can give us some knowledge, some nuggets of knowledge, we are ready for them.
Yeah, so once again, I say this every week. I'm not going to tell you to start Derrick Henry. I'm not going to tell you to sit Derrick Henry. Guys like that, they're obvious. You should be starting them every single week. So don't expect to get any superstars like that, although there will be some still relatively big names on this list. So to start off the starts this week, first off, we got Mr. Matthew Stafford. Once again, we just talked about them playing the Giants. I don't see any reason why the Giants defense should be able to slow down Stafford in this passing attack. They weren't able to do it against Dak last week. I think that Stafford and this Rams team can do the same thing. So Matt Stafford, put him in your starting lineups. And then next, a more of a sleeper option. If you're like me and you had Russell Wilson, he got hurt. Taylor Heineke is your guy this week. They played the Chiefs, as we talked about. This could be a shootout. The Washington offense, they have weapons like Antonio Gibson, J.D. McKissick, Scary Terry. I'm not sure on the status of Curtis Samuel, but I would start Taylor Heineke because he has been pretty solid so far this year in fantasy. I think he's a top 15 fantasy QB, and he's playing one of the worst defenses in the league right now in the Chiefs. At running back, we're going to start Mr. Javonte Williams from the Denver Broncos.
Free Javonte Williams.
Yes, free Javonte Williams. As we talked about in our last episode, he's near the top of the league when it comes to making people miss. I think that this could be potentially a game where he starts to win the job. They're playing the Raiders. It's a divisional opponent. The Raiders have been dealing with their distractions, and I think that the Broncos are going to come out and they're going to want to punch the Raiders right in the face early, and I think that could be Javonte Williams. I don't know the status of Melvin Gordon. He has been questionable throughout the week. I'm not sure if he's missed any practice, but if he doesn't play in this game, then this is absolutely a game where Javonte Williams needs to be starting because Melvin is really the only thing that's holding him back. Do you know the injury status right now for Melvin?
No, it still says as of today, October 14th, he is still questionable.
Okay, yeah. So just questionable. Apparently, he did practice today, but it was in limited capacity. He was a non-participant during the practice Wednesday. He's managing a lower leg contusion. So I don't know anything moving forward. Regardless, I think it's just something to monitor, and I think it's absolutely something that could lead to Javonte Williams having a bigger workload this week, and I think he's absolutely going to come through if he does get it. Next, at running back, Darrell Henderson for the Rams. Once again, the Giants, I don't expect them to put up a lot of resistance. I think Henderson could get involved in the receiving game here. And then also, as we talked about earlier, the Giants' rush defense has allowed the third most rushing yards on the season to running backs. And then even, when it comes to just fantasy points alone, they're allowing a lot of fantasy points. I think their defense ranks 5th in a bad way, against running backs in fantasy. So Darrell Henderson and Javonte Williams, those are the running backs. At wide receiver, Mr. Brandon Cooks from the Houston Texans. He's just been really consistent on the year, one of the most consistent receivers in fantasy. He has a monster target share. I don't expect that to change, especially against, the Colts, who, like you mentioned earlier, their secondary was taken advantage of last week. The Colts currently right now, they rank 32nd in the league in touchdown rate and 30th in yards per target allowed to wide receivers. Considering that Brandon Cooks is the guy in that offense, I think that just means that he's going to have a good week. I don't know if that means they win or even cover, but Brandon Cooks in fantasy, start him. Next at wide receiver, Mr. Jalen Waddle from Miami. I think a lot of fantasy owners are hoping that Jalen Waddle can finally have a good game. Right now, his target share is getting about 18% of the offensive targets. And with this week against Jacksonville, they rank 30th in yards per target to receiving, or 30th, in yards per target and receiving yards to slot receivers in the league this year. He's a slot receiver for the Dolphins. I think that he could have a big week against the Jaguars. Their secondary, not very great. So Jalen Waddle. And then finally, Kedarius Tony. I don't think I have to read off a lot of stats to people who are in fantasy. They know that Kedarius Tony the last few weeks has been absolutely killing it. So he's been having a monster performance. I don't expect that to change. I know they play the Rams. People, well, Jalen Ramsey. I don't think Jalen Ramsey is going to be following anyone in this game, especially Kedarius Tony, who's, one of those sort of shorter, quick guys who, is going to move around, playing the slot, playing the outside. I don't think that, the Rams are really worried about any one specific guy. So I think they're going to try and scheme up Kedarius to have some good, matchups, to be away from Jalen Ramsey. And if it's not Ramsey, they've had a lot of injuries in that secondary, especially at corner. So I think Kedarius could have a solid week. I'm starting him in my fantasy leagues. At tight end, Mr. Ricky Seals-Jones from the Washington football team. It's a very similar reason why Taylor Heineke. They're playing the Chiefs, who are really bad defense, and it's going to be a shootout, so they're going to need to keep up. Ricky Seals-Jones has been getting a lot of targets in the red zone ever since he took over the starting role due to the Logan Thomas injury, and I think that should keep up. I think he could get a touchdown in this one, and we saw last week Dawson Knox was able to have success against the Chiefs as well. So Ricky Seals-Jones, if you need him, go get him. Start him in this game.
I got him in our sleeper league because I had Dallas Goddard who had COVID. So yeah, and I think he got a bunch of targets last week too, so that helps.
Yeah.
So yeah, additional endorsement for Ricky Seals-Jones, just as a fill-in. We're not saying he's a stud, but just like John mentioned, this is more like fill-ins. If you had Dallas Goddard like me, or then Ricky Seals-Jones is viable. And I think, was he in your waiver wire? Did he make your waiver wires?
Yeah, he was on the waiver wires.
Yeah, but I think he's still available in a lot of leagues too. So if you haven't got him, he might still be there.
And I know that this is also a bye week for George Kittle and the 49ers. Obviously, he didn't play last week, so maybe you already have a replacement. But if you are a George Kittle owner and you don't have him in your lineup because of the bye, Ricky Seals-Jones, if he's still out there, go get him. Now moving on to the sits. This one was a little bit tougher because this week, once again, there's not a lot of crazy matchups, but I think there are some key ones that we want to avoid. First off, Ryan Tannehill. We just talked about the Bills versus Titans and how the Bills their pass defense overall has been ranked as the best in the league through 5 weeks. I think that's something to avoid when it comes to Ryan Tannehill. He hasn't had an amazing fantasy season so far, like we've expected. I've even seen in some of my leagues that he's been dropped. So if you have Ryan Tannehill, I would avoid starting him this week. And the next one is Mr. Derrick Carr from the Raiders. There's just a lot going on with the Raiders, a lot of distractions. They're playing Denver, who has a good secondary, and with the Broncos specifically, against quarterbacks in fantasy, they have had some success. They are the second best defense when it comes to fantasy points allowed against quarterbacks this year. So you're going to want to avoid that. And, that means benching Derrick Carr, who has been a, popular pickup and start option, to start the season so far. At running back, we're going to say James Conner from the Arizona Cardinals. We're going to say sit him this week. He's very touchdown dependent, and I'm just a little worried that he's not going to be able to pull one out this week specifically. They play the Browns, and the Browns defense has been no joke. They've had some of these games where it's been real tight, and I think that if the Cardinals are going to be scoring, I expect it to be their receivers, because the Browns secondary has had some injuries, recently, especially last week. They were very banged up against the Chargers. And so I would avoid James Conner, because if he's not scoring touchdowns, he's probably not going to get you many points. And finally, for running back, Damon Harris from the New England Patriots. And this is because I'm just, first off, Dallas actually has been pretty solid against the run so far. I think they have the 6th ranked run defense. But also I'm a little concerned based on some of the comments that the running backs coach made about the backups to Damon Harris this week. His name is Ivan Fears, and he was talking about Ramondre Stevenson, someone who was a preseason stud that a lot of people were hyping up. And the way that he was talking about Ramondre Stevenson, and I'll read the exact quote as he said, Ramondre started out too cautious. He was almost very nervous to carry the ball. We can't play that way. He turned it loose at the end. We're going to get the cowbell going with that boy. He's going to turn it loose, and we're going to be all right. Hearing the words bell and cow for a backup running back is not exactly what you want to be hearing if you're a Damon Harris owner like myself in our sleeper league, because bell cow means that's a guy you want to get the ball. And Ramondre Stevenson, what we saw in preseason and the way that they're talking about him right now, I think they have a lot of faith in him. And as you talked about, the Patriots running backs, they're a dime a dozen. You never know who's going to be involved. And so I would avoid Damon Harris this week just because of those comments. And Dallas, once again, has a good run defense. All right, moving on to wide receiver for sits. Allen Robinson. They're playing the Packers. Jair Alexander, he's not going to be there, but overall, the secondary is held up. And as we've talked about with the Bears, it looks like they just want to keep things simple for Justin Fields as of right now. We don't know when things will start to get unleashed, but Allen Robinson has not been able to really get anything going this season at all so far. He's been pretty disappointing, which is weird because I expected him to actually have a really good year, especially with Fields, playing quarterback. That has not happened so far. They're going to rely on their run game. It is something to monitor and note that Damon Williams, did get COVID, and so he is actually out. David Montgomery is still out, so Khalil Herbert is their only running back. So maybe they, have to throw more just out of necessity because of how thin they are at running back. But if that's the case, I'm expecting more of a Darnell Mooney sort of a game than an Allen Robinson game. So I would avoid Allen Robinson this week just because of the uncertainty. Next, AJ Green from the Arizona Cardinals. There's just too many mouths to feed in that offense, and I just don't really have a lot of faith in AJ Green to be one of them, especially since he's going to be playing on the outside. With the Browns secondary specifically, Denzel Ward's not going to be following anyone, and so I think they're going to want to move DeAndre Hopkins away from him to get an easier matchup against Greg Newsome or whoever's on the outside over there. And I think that would mean that AJ Green's going to be on the other side being covered by Denzel Ward. I don't know how much of the game, but I just don't expect the coaching staff to try and scheme up specific AJ Green stuff in this one to where maybe Rondale Moore, Christian Kirk, DeAndre Hopkins, even Chase Edmonds are probably more likely to get involved. So I would avoid AJ Green. And then next, this is a big name receiver who's actually been good for the most part this year in fantasy, but that's Adam Thielen. He's actually been really touchdown dependent for the most part. His target share and his overall workload has just not been there. And the thing that is saving him has been touchdowns. I'm not super confident that he's going to be able to get one this week. He plays Carolina, a tough, stout defense. They have a good secondary, and they have a good coaching staff. So I would just avoid Adam Thielen this week because...
Oh, he froze again.
Yeah, so wouldn't start Adam Thielen this week because of all those factors. And then moving on to tight end, the final sit, Jonnu Smith from the New England Patriots. I was a little surprised. I figured that he would be the go-to guy between him and Hunter. But the last few weeks, Jonnu Smith's role has been decreasing less and less. And, Hunter Henry has been, starting to take the workload overall to where last week I think he had 7 catches. So I would just avoid Patriots tight ends in general. But if you had to pick one, I'd be taking Hunter Henry and sitting Jonnu Smith this week. So those are the starts and sits for week 6. If you have any fantasy questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments or ask away on Instagram.
Yep, and John definitely will be answering those this weekend. I will be MIA basically until Sunday. Got waiting to go to. Congratulations, Kim and Jose. But we'll be back next week after week 6. We'll also be doing our third year MVP maybe rankings or something. We'll do something with the MVP, maybe rankings or just guys at MVP race. Hopefully it dwindles down a little bit. There's still like 4 or 5 guys in that conversation. But anyways, we'll weed that out and obviously be back with the reactions then. Otherwise, hopefully everyone, you have a good week fantasy wise, IRL and actual football wise. And yeah, other than that, enjoy y'all's weekend and we will see you next time.